So you've been reading about Eleanor Roosevelt in Eleanor Everywhere, and this story's about her husband. It's called Nice Work, Franklin, written by Suzanne Germain. Nice work, Franklin. Of all the lucky people in America, young Franklin Roosevelt was one of the luckiest. He was rich, he was smart, he was popular, and he was determined. Franklin was determined to be like the greatest man he knew. He was determined to be like his cousin Theodore Roosevelt, President of the United States. Now, of course, trying to be like the president is usually a very good thing, but Franklin got a little carried away. First, he put on eyeglasses that looked exactly like his cousin Ted's. Another time, he grew sort of a Ted mustache. And since President Theodore liked to say the word delighted, Franklin began to say delighted too. Still deep inside, Franklin knew that to truly be like Cousin Ted, he would have to work hard. He would have to work very hard for his country. So naturally, he started in. First, Franklin became a member of the New York legislature, just like his older cousin Ted. Then Franklin helped to run the U.S. Navy exactly like his famous cousin Ted. And soon folks began to say that Franklin might become a governor or even president. Yes, they said that youngster Roosevelt is going to do big stuff, exactly like his famous older cousin, President Ted. So of course you might think that Franklin's life was just chocolate and sunshine and roses. And mostly it was, until 1921. Then soon after his 39th birthday, Franklin Roosevelt got sick. Slowly, with everyone's help, Franklin got stronger. He got strong enough to lift a 230-pound shark out of the water while he was fishing. He got well enough to drive a specially made car using only his hands. He even figured out how to stand up on his braced legs long enough to make speeches. Then, because Eleanor made a special effort to introduce Franklin to poor Americans and working Americans, he learned a lot about how ordinary U.S. citizens lived. And when friends asked if he could make a big step and run for the governor of New York, Franklin said, "Yes, I can." Now, no disabled person had ever tried to become governor or president or even a mayor before, so of course some people objected. They said that a handicapped person like Franklin was not strong enough to carry out the business of government. But Franklin's friends just answered, "Phooey." A governor's business is brain work, they said. The governor of New York State does not need to be an acrobat. And that made sense. It made such sense that the New Yorkers elected Franklin Roosevelt. So of course you might think that life was just chocolate and sunshine and roses. And in some ways it was, until 1929. Then, while Franklin was trying to do good work as governor, America got sick. Some people thought this business sickness started with one event, and some people said it started with another. But everybody knew that in 1929, a whole lot of well-off people suddenly went broke because they lost all their money gambling on the New York City stock market. Then a lot of farmers and workers went broke. They went broke because no one would pay enough for their crops and services. Soon many factories and stores fired all their employees and shut down because most folks couldn't afford to buy their products. And when out-of-work people tried to withdraw their money, thousands of banks went broke, closed their doors, and went completely out of business. Millions of people lost their jobs, and soon out of every 4 American grown-ups had no work. 1 out of every 4 American grown-ups had no work. Many lived in cardboard shacks because they couldn't afford to pay the rent. Some looked in garbage cans for food. Others stood in line to get a piece of bread. Everything was going wrong, and everyone was very, very scared. So there was America, sick and broke and scared and stuck with one great giant problem. In Washington, U.S. government officials shook their heads. They said they couldn't fix the mess, but Franklin was determined. He believed that if you have a problem, solve it. If one solution doesn't work, try another, and above all, try something. And he decided to run for president. Now, of course, some people objected. They said that a paralyzed man was not strong enough to lead a troubled nation. But Franklin told voters, I can do it. I can solve this country's problems. And Americans listened. They said, if this Roosevelt guy can beat polio, he can probably beat anything. So in 1932, they elected him president. But solving the problems of a whole country was one mighty big job, and sometimes even Franklin D. Roosevelt wondered if he could really do it. So at a church service before he was sworn in as president, Franklin knelt for a long time, holding his head in his hands, probably hoping for strength. Then he got up and got started. First, at the inauguration, the presidential swearing-in ceremony, Franklin did not sit in his wheelchair. He stood up. With his brace as a cane and the help of his son, Franklin stood on his paralyzed legs. And Americans saw that both sick people and sick nations could get better. Then, as the whole nation listened, Franklin Roosevelt told people not to be afraid. Fear, he said, just makes folks give up and stop trying. And that, Franklin told America, is why the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Besides, Franklin said, I am determined to act and act quickly. And naturally, he did. He put the government to work so fast that after the inauguration, lights stayed on practically all night in official buildings all over Washington. Then, because people had no money, Franklin had Congress pass a new law that put banks back in business. But of course, what Americans really needed was jobs. So Franklin tried another new thing. He had the government put Americans to work. He gave some Americans jobs building dams, highways, tunnels, parks, schools, and bridges. He gave artists jobs painting pictures and shoemakers jobs painting shoes. Once there was even a government circus that hired out-of-work clowns and acrobats. But that still didn't solve all the nation's problems, so Franklin found new ways to help farmers. For the first time, he had the government give pensions to old people and money to people who had lost their jobs. But all this was new stuff. Was all this new stuff helping? Franklin had to know. So Eleanor volunteered to travel all over the country to find out. Soon she had visited so many places that people saw the First Lady could turn up anywhere, and she did. Once she surprised everyone by putting on a miner's hat and popping in a coal mine. But even Eleanor couldn't find out everything, so Franklin talked to Americans on the radio. My friends, he said, I want to know, are you better off? And people answered. 8,000 letters a day poured into the White House, and some of those letters said, yes, I feel 100% better. But other letters said, no, I am not better, and lots of folks just grumbled. Some said that Franklin was doing too much, spending too much government money, and ruining the country. They called him Rattlesnake Roosevelt, and some soreheads just wanted Franklin to stop talking and get off the radio. We want to hear some music. But even while those soreheads were grumbling, America was getting a little better. First, a few factories and stores reopened. Then a few unemployed men and women found jobs. And when Franklin visited Chicago, thousands paraded down the streets with him. People pointed and yelled, he saved my home. He got me a job. So naturally, when Franklin ran for president again in 1936, even more people voted for him. And on Inauguration Day, when Franklin stood on his braced legs to be sworn in again as president, people cheered. They cheered because even though he couldn't walk, Franklin D. Roosevelt had taken big steps. He had taken big steps to help America. Nice work, Franklin.